Okay, welcome everyone. As we are learning, sponsored by A.B. Spry, L'Refuah Shalema for Toiba Reiza Bas Hinda and for Great Zivudingum for their daughter and grandchildren. We're learning for the spiritual, emotional, and physical protection for Yeshua Menachem Mendel Ben Bela Shendel Rivka. We're learning sponsored by Shalom Fogel, Lina Nishmas Yaakov Zeb Ben Yehuda Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas God, Yosef Ben Sion Ben Yaakov Zev, and for the great Shidduch for Chayat Tzivya Bas Shoshana Gittel. We're learning sponsored by Baruch Ian, Lina Nishmas Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba, Esther Bas Yona, Avram Ben Shmuel HaKayin. We're learning sponsored by Eddie Chazan for the safety of Am Yisrael and for the success of the IDF and for their safety. And we are sponsored by Menachem Umansky for those that are looking for a Zivik should find quickly and easily. We are holding, again, at a new Mishnah. The new Mishnah is at the bottom of Yud Daled Amud Beis, and we could welcome in everybody ready as we welcome in Mo Kushner, and we have good news that Baruch Hashem, the procedure on his older brother, age 101, Kenayan Hara, 101 young, is good. And we welcome in Yitzi Mala, Yaakov Orman, Irving Fishbaum. Irving, it's great to have you. You remember that, the Frosted Flakes Tiger, and we welcome in Shimon Klein, Saba, A.B. Spry, Shelley Zeitlin, Barish Gesseman, Mel Zachters, Dr. Black, Dr. Guy, Yisrael Fisher, Shalom Fogel, Eddie Chazan. We welcome in Menachem Umansky, Moshe Lehman, Nachman Chaplin, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Abe Arbach, Elias Schutman. We welcome in David Helfgott and Yitz Fuchs. We are holding, as I said, at the new Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Daled Amud Beis, Mokum shenagu limkor behema dakal oivdei kechavim moichin, in a place where they sell small livestock to a idolater, and they're not worried about bestiality. Bestiality wasn't a thing in that place, then you could sell it. Mokum shenagu sheloi limkor, a place where the minig is not to sell it because they're suspected of bestiality, ein moichin. A large animal, as we'll see, three reasons in the Gemara. One is because if you sell it, you might come to rent it to them or lend it to them, and then they will work with them on Shabbos, and you will be over the Isser of Shvisas Behemtoi, of not having your animal rest. Also, another reason we'll see in the Gemara is because we're afraid that you'll sell it, and right before Shabbos you'll make the sale, and at Shkia the guy will want you to show him a test, and you'll call the animal, and he'll come to you on Shabbos, and you'll be over the Isser of Mechamer, leading an animal on Shabbos. The truth of the matter is, even though it says large livestock, even small calves and small horses, actually siachim are small donkeys, shleimin ushvurim, whether they actually siachim are called foals. Whether they're shleimin or shvurim, whether they're whole or broken, because we're geyser small ones are to big ones, and broken are to whole ones. Rabbi Yehuda Mata B'Shvur, Rabbi Yehuda says if it's maimed, you could sell it, because obviously you're not going to lease it or rent it for work because it's maimed, nor are you going to make a test with it. B'Meseira permits a horse, because B'Meseira says we're not worried about work on Shabbos with a horse, because a chay is noisei, it's atzmai. There's no horses for riding, and there's no issa d'oraisa for the animal to ride, because the chay is noisei, it's atzmai. The living person helps carry himself, so it's not a full malacha on the part of the horse, and therefore it's not forbidden. So the Gemara says, Gemara now analyzes the situation of a behema daka, a small livestock. Lamemra, do you mean to imply the isura leka? It's not a blanket isur. Min hagahu deika. It's only dependent on custom. So heicha de nog isur nog, where they practice an isur, they practice an isur, meaning that in that place there's a problem of bestiality. And heicha de nog heter nog, that means that there's some places that there's no concern about bestiality. You can't leave an animal in the stable of the pagan. Wow, I'm getting blacking out over here. This is really interesting. The item hears me? Yeah?
I hear you now.
Yeah. Wow, it must be some bad weather somewhere.
We didn't have any luck.
Says the Gemara, you can't put an animal in the stable of a pagan because they're suspected of bestiality. Says the Gemara, well, you're right. That also depends on the custom. If it's a place that they permitted to sell the small livestock because they're not worried about bestiality, then you're allowed to leave the animal alone with them as well. In a place where they said that you cannot leave the pagan alone with the animal, then asru limkar. That's where it's forbidden to sell them the small livestock. The Rabbi Lazar says, no, there's a difference. Even in a place where you cannot leave your animal alone with them because they're suspected of bestiality, but mutalimka, you could sell it to them. Why? They'll mess around with your animal because they're not afraid when they commit sodomy on your animal, it could make it sterile. So their own animal, they're not going to take a chance of making it sterile, and then they won't be able to use it for breeding. But your animal, they don't care. Even in a place where it's forbidden that they should be alone with your animal, mutalimka, but you are allowed to sell them small livestock, my timer, on an animal that he buys. He's not going to sodomize shaloi te'akar in order not to make it sterile. Va'af Rav hadebei, and Rav also retracted. Damar Rav Tachlifa, Rav Shil Ba'ami Mishmei de Rav. Oive kechavim chasal behemtoi shaloi te'akar. He's not worried about his animal, so even in a place where you're not allowed to leave them alone with your animal because they're suspected of bestiality, but you might be able to sell them the small livestock because they're not going to do it to their animal because they don't want to make it sterile. And now let's talk about the large livestock. You can't sell them large livestock. My time, what's the reason? It says the Gemara, and even if we're not suspecting of bestiality, but mavid be malacha chayshina, we're afraid that they're going to do work with it on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, but if a guy buys it, he could do whatever he wants with it on Shabbos. V'niyavet kevin the zavna kanya. Once he buys it, he acquires it, and then he could do work with it on Shabbos. A guy could work the animal on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, no, gezerah mishum she'ela or mishum schiris. We're afraid that if Eddie, who, I shouldn't really tell you this, but Eddie does a lot of business with these people. right? So Eddie, we're afraid that if he sells it to them, he might lend it to them or lease it to them, and then when they do work with Shabbos, Eddie's animal will be working on Shabbos. So the Gemara says it's a Gezeira Mishum She'elo Mishum Schiris. Says the Gemara, no, She'ela Kanya, if he lends it to them, a Shoyel acquires it, the Agra Kanya, and the leaser acquires it. So once again, it belongs to the guy. Rami Breder Rav Yaiva, a Nubshat. Gezeira Mishum Nisyayni, because Eddie, before he sells it, they're going to ask for a test to see if it listens to commands, and it might be right before Shabbos, and before he seals the deal, as Shkia arrives, the guy will say, Eddie, make a test, and Eddie will call the animal, and the animal will come, and then he'll be over mechamer on Shabbos. The zimnon, the zomnei nihame samach l'shkia sachama, the Mali Shabbos. So sometimes he'll be selling it right before Shkia, sunset on Friday. V'amalei ton nasya nihale, he'll say, come test it. V'shamala l'kali, and he'll hear Eddie's voice. V'ozla machmasei, and it's going to go because of Eddie's command. V'nichalei the tezel, and Eddie wants that because he wants it to show that it's an obedient animal. And he'll be causing the animal to follow his orders on Shabbos. Ooh, ouch. Rav Sheshbred is not taking sitting down what you just said, that when you rent it to a guy, it becomes the guy's. Uschiris mikanya, when you rent it to someone, does it become the possession of the renter? V'tanan, af b'makom she'amru lahaskir, when Eddie rents one of his apartments scattered through the speckled plain of the United States, when he rents one of his apartments, loyla beis dira amru, he can't rent to a pagan to live in it. He could rent it for storage, but not to live in it. Because if he rents it to the guy for living quarters, the guy will bring in his Avoda Zara, and it says, you shouldn't bring an abomination into your house. But if the guy rents it, it becomes the guy, so what if he brings it into his house? The guy is bringing it into his own house. Why can't Eddie rent it to him? Says the Gemara, Shani Avodas Kechavim de Chamira. Avodas Kechavim is more serious. So although a renter acquires it, but since it's still Eddie's owns the house, and it's very stringent because there are many Yisurim, but it doesn't say that you can't bring a chazer into your house. It doesn't say, only by idolatry does it say you can't bring it into your house. Maybe it's usher even though the guy acquires it with the schiris. But now the Gemara makes a knockout blow to show that actually the renter doesn't acquire it. Does a renter acquire it? So here's an interesting thing. If Eddie rents an animal from a kohen, can he feed it truma? So listen to the halacha. If Eddie rents a cow from a kohen, yachilenu kashine truma, he could feed it vetch of truma. Why? Because it's still the kohen's animal. However, the kohen shesacha par Yisrael, a kohen that rents a cow from Yisrael, afal pishem zainoisa, but shem zainoisa, even though the kohen who rents it has to feed it, lo yachilenu kashine truma. So you see that it's not the property of the renter. If a kohen rents it and he acquires it, then why can't he give it truma? It's paradidei. It's his cow if he acquired it. Oh, once we say renting doesn't acquire it, and once we say if you borrow, you don't acquire it. So now we have another reason why you can't sell large livestock, because if Eddie sells his large livestock, we might be afraid that he might come to rent it out or lease it out to the guy. And the guy, since he doesn't acquire it, when he works it on Shabbos, it's Eddie's animal that's working on Shabbos. So v'hashdadam it's schiras like Kanya, and then by extension, She'ela would also not acquire Gezerah Mishum Schiras because of a rental, or Gezerah Mishum She'ela, and also Gezerah Mishum Nisyane, giving it a test like we explained. Now, it's good to have over here tonight 29 Zoomers, although we're Marshallist and Mark Frankelist. Again, we have a heavy schedule tonight. After the daf, we will have for the Shabbos table, and now we have 30 Zoomers as we welcome in Stephen Holtzman, giving us, I think it's 30. Still 29, I think. But anyway, we'll have for the Shabbos table after the shir, a very interesting one, and then we will have Mishnah Yaimis, which is the 48 Kinyane Atayra. So a very, very interesting night coming up. But let's go now in this interesting daf. Rav Ada Shorei Lizvune Chamra Eda de Safsira. Rav Ada permitted selling a donkey to a guy using an agent. Here's our 30th person. As we welcome in Yitz Fuchs. Good to have you, Yitzi. So Rav Ada Shari Lizvira Chamra Eda de Sapsira. Rav Ada permitted selling a donkey using an agent. Why? Because the agent has no right to lend it or rent it. So you don't have to be worried that he might lend it or rent it. Also, the agent is not going to want to lend it or rent it because he wants to make a sale and he doesn't want to reveal to people its blemishes. And we're not worried he's going to make a test because the animal won't recognize the voice of the agent. Says he doesn't recognize his voice, that he should follow his command. So he won't be able to make a test right at the onset of Shabbos. And if you're worried about that he might give it as a loan or rent it, since it's not his, and he was only instructed to sell it, so loy Moshe v'loy Meiger, he's not going to be able to lend it or rent it. And furthermore, since he's a savvy agent, he's not going to want to lend it or rent it because he doesn't want to show people its chesroinus. Mishum d'loy niglei beimuma. He doesn't want people to see that it might have certain idiosyncrasies, and it won't be able to sell it. Rav Huna Zavin ahi para loivi kechav. Rav Huna sold a cow to a guy. Amalei Rav Chisda, my time of Marachi, it's large livestock. You're not supposed to sell large livestock to a guy. Amalei, so here he said, with a cow, we could be Taila Lakula that he's buying it to slaughter it. So he's not buying it to use it. Amalei Ema L'Shchita Zavna. Says the Gemara, how do we know as we turn to Daf Tesvav Amid Beis Manos Semra Da'minon K'Hai Gavna? How do we know that if we could be toilet? How do we know that if we could be toilet Lakula, that we could be toilet Lakula? In other words, also, we're not worried about bestiality, because we could be toilet lakula that he's going to shecht it, and therefore there's no concern also of lifnei evil loisite mechsel. Ditnan Beishami Amrim lo yimka adam para hachareshes b'shvius. Beishami says you can't sell a cow that has been trained to plow on Shemitah to a yid who is not careful in Shemitah, because he might work with it, the field, and you'll be over l'fnei eva. Beisilu matirin, why? Because you can be told l'kula that he's buying it for barbecue. Rabba. So Rabba says, don't compare the two. Midami. Hasam ein adam mitzuva al shvisas behemtoi b'shvias. There's no concern about the animal, the owner, working the animal on Shemitah. A person is not commanded that his animal should rest on Shemitah. All you have is a concern about lifnei iver loisite mechshel. So for lifnei iver loisite mechshel, we could be talina lakula. Hacha adam mitzvah al shvisas be'emta b'Shabbos, and we should be afraid that when you sell the cow, you might demonstrate right before Shabbos, making an issa d'oraisa, or you might, instead of selling it, you might lend it or rent it, which would be a problem of an issa d'oraisa. Amalei Abaya, the koheicha the adam mitzvah, where a person is commanded, is it aser? Varisada, a field. The adam mitzvah al shvisas sadeu b'shvias. You're commanded that your field shouldn't be worked on shvias. Yet v'tanan beishami yomim lo yimkar adam sadei neir b'shvias. You cannot sell your plowed field on shmita, because the yid who is not careful of shmita might work it. Or beisilu matirin mipnei sheyachal lo ivira, because you could be talin lakula, and you could say that he'll give it a rest this year, because a lot of people do fallow one year and planting another year. So you see that Beisila is not worried, even though you might even though you have to have your field rest on Shviz. Maskva Ravashi v'kol eichad ein adam mitzvah shari, and where you're not commanded, is it permitted? Vari kelim, utensils, the ein adam mitzvah al shvisas kelim b'shvias. You don't have to keep your utensils resting on Shemitah. You could use a yoke not for work in the field. You could use your shovel not for work in the field. Yet v'tanan elu ein kelim she'ein adam rashi limka b'shvias. The following, you cannot sell to a person, to a yid who's not careful with Shemitah. Hamacharesha, a plow, the kokela and all its accessories. Ha'oil, the yoke of the animal. V'amazara, the rake. Badeker, and a hoe. Elama Ravashi, so we have to fine-tune the distinction. Elama Ravashi, kol eicha de'ika l'mitla, where you could say that it's for a cooler usage, talinon, and we could be toilet even where you're mitzvah to have it rest like a field. V'afagav the mitzvah. But the kol eicha de'leka l'mitla, nobody buys a plow or a rake except to use it, then loy talinon, even though it's only because of fnei iver. Afagav the eina mitzvah. Ravin Zavin Ha'u Chamra Yisrael HaChoshid Limkar Lo'ivikachav. Rabba sold a donkey to a yid who's suspected to in turn sell it to a guy. Amalei Abayim, I tell him, why are you doing that? He's gonna sell it to a pagan, and that could be a problem. Either because he'll test it before Shabbos, or it'll be a problem because he might come to rent it, he might come to lend it. Amalei Abayim, my time, Ovid Marhachi. Amalei, so he says, look, Anoli Yisrael's Rine. I sold it to a Yid, I didn't sell it to a guy. So he said, yeah, but that Yid is going to sell it to a guy. Says Gemara, we don't know that. He sells it to the best price. He might sell it to a Yid. So here, he might sell it to a Yid, and we're not worried. Even if he sells it to a guy, it might not be before Shabbos, and he might not come to rent it and lend it. Says the Gemara, in a place where the minig is to sell a small livestock to a kusi, now, in a place where you don't sell it to a kusi, it's not because of bestiality. My time. That they're suspected of bestiality. Nobody holds a kusi is suspected of bestiality. You can't leave an animal in the stable of pagans, even male animals by male pagans, and the kavis eats on the kavis, or females by female pagans, even though it's less likely bestiality with the same gender. That you can't leave nekavis eats on zacharim, female animals by male pagans, and zachar male animals eats on the kavis by female pagans. However, and for that same reason, you can't give an animal to their shepherds. And you can't leave them alone with the goyim. You can't leave them alone with your child to teach them secular studies or a livelihood, because we're afraid that they'll molest them. Avol, by a kusi, we're not worried about these things. You could leave an animal in a stable of kusim, zachar meitzel nekavis, even males by females, and nekavis eitzel zachar. Vein tzarich leimer, where it's the same gender, zachar meitzel zachar, and nekavis eitzel nekavis. O meisim behemel arayah shalem, you could give an animal to their shepherd. O miyachrin imam, and you could leave your animals with them. O meisim lem tinik lamdei sefer lamdei umna. So then, what's the svara of the one that holds that you cannot sell small livestock to a kusi? It must be because we're afraid that the kusi will sell it to a pagan. You cannot sell a pagan a sword or a spear, or the scabbard that the sword goes into. You can't sharpen a sword for them. You cannot sell to them. The sadin is foot shackles, nor collars, iron collars, nor chains, or handcuffs of iron. Now, my time, what's the reason why you can't sell these things to a kusi? If it's because they're suspected of murder, but a kusi is not suspected for murder. It could be alone with them. It's because they could come to sell it to a pagan, and the same thing by small livestock. Says the Gemara, "V'chi tema kusi lo yavet tshuva," that the kusi won't do tshuva. Says the Gemara, "V'chi tema kusi lo yavet tshuva." Kusi is different because he won't become better, not to sell it to a guy, but a Yisrael will do tshuva. So in other words, it's less of a chashash that a Yisrael will sell it to the guy. Chitema kusi lo avid tshuva Yisrael avid tshuva. V'amar Rav Nachman amar Rav Avua kederech she'amru asu limkor la'avid kechavim. Just like it says that you're not allowed to sell it to a guy, kach asu limkor Yisrael hachashid limkor la'avid kechavim. So you see that we are concerned, unlike what Rabbah said, that you could sell it to a guy because the guy who says he's going to sell it to another guy, maybe he'll sell it to a yid, and you could be told of that. Here it says clearly that just like you're not allowed to sell to a guy, that you're not allowed to sell it to a Yisrael who's suspected of selling it to the guy. And we don't say, but maybe he'll sell it to a yid. So Rod Basrei Tlosa Parsei, Rabbah ran after the yid that was choshed that he sold it to get it back, 3 parsais. He ran a parsa in the sand, but he didn't catch up to him. Okay, Rabbi said we'll stop over here. We're going to have now the segment for the Shabbos table.